anonymousretailer.com.
Hello, anonymous retailers. I'm Jason from anonymousretailer.com. Today, we're going to be talking with Steve Coughran, founder of Cultivar and author of the book Cash Flow: How to Build a Great Company that Endures in Tough Economies and Thrives in Booming Ones. This is going to be a good one because cash rules everything around you and me. Let's get into it. Steve, how you doing today, sir?
Great. Good to be with you, Jason.
I appreciate you taking the time to sit down with us and talk about a very abstract topic. Before we jump in to the interview, I want to share my experience on how I came across your book, Cash Flow: How to Build a Great Company that Endures in Tough Economies and Thrives in Booming Ones. For me, this was a very retro 90s record store experience. I was looking around Amazon for books on cash flow, and full transparency, I bought the book on the cover. That tagline pulled me in, and I wasn't disappointed at all. I mean, I'm on my third go around now reading it. It's a very deep reference material and something that you need to keep with you and read a few times to really catch it all. I came back as I was pulling my thoughts together for this interview this week. I found more stuff to pull out. So we may pivot a little bit outside the outline that I sent you. Beyond that, this book is highly quotable. You got some solid zingers in here, some good one-liners. We use the term retail therapy gems on the blog, and we're going to co-opt that in this conversation with cash flow and strategy gems as we move throughout the conversation today. I'm excited to get into it. So let's hop into the cash flow fog.
Okay.
And I want to start with this CEO quote from your book that starts it all out. And I feel this is highly, highly relatable to a lot of retailers. I'm guilty of it. I was very guilty of it. But we've got a quote in here from this CEO, and it says, "Steve, this is great, but I feel like one day this is all going to catch up to me because I don't really understand what our cash flow is."
Yeah.
Talk to me about that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. And this isn't just isolated to one conversation, Jason. It's the majority of leaders out there, business owners, business leaders, they look at the income statement. And I mean, that's what we're taught in school. Even if you go through some of the best accounting programs out there, you learn about the income statement, a little bit about the balance sheet, but nobody talks about the statement of cash flows. So in business, these leaders look at their P&L and they see revenue coming in, sales. They understand cost, right? They understand all their costs associated with their materials, their labor, their insurance, their office supplies, occupancy, like rent, everything else. And they know that if they take sales minus costs, they end up with profit. But then there's this sneaking suspicion that something is wrong, because when they look at the financials, even though they may be a few weeks old, right? Because you're looking at them after the close of the period, they're like, something's off because my P&L says I made $100,000 last month, but I have like 10 grand in my bank account and I'm pulling on my line of credit to make payroll this week. What's going on? And that's the big discrepancy between cash flow and profit.
Yep. So you kind of touched on there. What eventually is it that catches up to them?
Yeah. Eventually what happens is things on the balance sheet continue to grow, liabilities, for example, or they mismanage their receivables. They're not collecting from their customers in a timely manner. And then what happens is they find themselves out of cash. So they have profit. Most of the time they have profit, but they have no cash, and they can tap into lines of credit. They can use debt. They could put their own money in. I've seen some business owners refinance their house, borrow money from friends and family. But then eventually all those sources dry up. And what's interesting about bank loans or debt, people want to give you debt when you're strong financially, right? So it's kind of like this interesting situation that people find themselves in. When the business is good, they don't need debt. When the business isn't doing well, they need debt, right? So when they need it, it's not available because nobody wants to lend to them when their financials are terrible. So that's what happens. And then it all catches up. They run out of cash and then they end up closing down their business.
Yep. It's interesting, your take on the income statement. I'll get into it a little later, but your take on the aspect of the cash flow and the profitability. I've talked to a few people about this, and not many people take that path in discussing that topic.
Yeah.
So what happened to that CEO once they understood the cash flow? What changed?
I think everything changed because when you understand what's driving the cash flow. And so I talk about 7 general levers. There's really 8 core levers. When you break down all the components, I combine some of them together to make it a little bit easier to understand. But when you understand what's driving the business, then you can start improving the business. So like, for example, Jason, you're big into skateboarding. Like that's been your whole life, right?
Yep.
And so if somebody was to measure something, I don't know, like a trick or how fast you go on a skateboard, what would it be? Like, how would you measure success, or how would you measure if somebody was good on a skateboard?
Let's just take something simple. How high can you ollie?
Okay. How high can you ollie? So if I measure your current ollie, like, okay, let's take your ollie. When did you start skateboarding?
I started skateboarding. I'm going to age myself here. I started skateboarding in 1983.
Okay, 1983. How high was your ollie when you first started, when you were probably terrible at skateboarding?
It was tiny because you had these gigantic boards and I was about 3'5". So yes, It was tiny.
Yeah, I don't even know if I can ollie. So hey, anything better
these
than
days
zero
I cannot.
is great.
Yeah.
So, but let's just say it was an inch. Let's say you got an inch off the ground.
That's probably fair.
So if I was your coach, and I'm not a coach, but let's just say I was your coach, your skateboarding coach, and I said, okay, let's measure. You're at 1 inch. Let's get you to 3. Then it comes down to what can you actually do to improve your ollie? And so the same thing is true in business. A lot of times you're like, we don't have cash flow. We're really struggling. You look at your financials, it looks like a bunch of gobbledygook. You don't know what to fix. And even if you do know what to fix, you don't understand what actions to take to fix it. So like going back to skateboarding, there are specific things you can do to improve your ollie. But what most people do, like let's just say I told you, if you get to a 3-inch ollie, I'll give you 10 grand. You're highly motivated to do that, right? And if we came back and like met together a month later and I said, so how's your ollie going? You're like, yeah, it's not really improving. Why not? Well, I've just been really busy trying to fix it. I subscribe to the skateboarding magazine. I've been watching all these skateboarding videos. I joined a skateboarding club, and it's like, okay, that's great, Jason. I'm glad you're busy with that stuff, bud. But like, what have you actually done to improve it? Right. So the same thing could be said with running. Maybe that's a better analogy for some people. If I run a 7-minute mile and I want to qualify for the Boston Marathon, I need to be at 5:30, let's say. I can join a running club. I can buy running shoes. I could change my diet, but that may not change my situation. It's literally, I have to go on the track and run sprints. Right. And so in business, people know they have cash flow issues. Their financials are a mess, so they can't even measure it in the first place. And then if they can measure it, they get distracted by all different types of things, right? So like what I like try to do with business owners is I give them the specific levers. I say, look, these are the 3 specific things you could do to improve your cash flow. And if you go from holding 60 days of inventory down to 52, let's just get there. That's a $350,000 improvement in cash flow. And when you know that, you're like, wow, okay, show me how to make that improvement. Does that make sense, Jason?
Makes 100% sense, especially when you talk about inventory. You're speaking my language.
Yeah. And I think that's what a lot of retailers, like when you look at your P&L, you look at profit, and then you wonder where the difference is in cash flow. It's in working capital. So it's in money that people owe you. And if you're a retailer and you're just point of sale, then your accounts receivable is probably pretty low. But inventory can be a huge problem, right? Because that's cash literally sitting in the back of your shop or on the shelf, etc. You may be paying your vendors too quickly, which sounds kind of weird, right? Because you're like, well, I want to pay my bills on time. Well, if your vendors are giving you 30-day terms and you're paying them in 5 days, that's great for your relationship with your vendors, but it could be terrible for your cash flow management. So there's just certain things like that you have to understand with the income statement and the balance sheet. And a lot of people, let's face it, like you started a skateboarding business back in the day because you love skateboarding. But most people, they start businesses because they love what they do. They don't start businesses because they're finance nerds like me, right?
Very well put. So circling back to your skateboarding, running, and cash flow example, the three linking components of all of that is alignment. You have to have your body perfectly aligned to be able to ollie well. If you're going to run fast and efficient, you have to be perfectly aligned. And if you're going to have good cash flow, you got to be aligned with the cash flow. So you dropped them in there, your 7 levers. Let's just go over the 7 levers real quick. I don't want to get deep into the 7 levers because we're going to take some gems out of the 7 levers. But I think for a conversation, the flow of the conversation, I think everybody that's listening should at least know what the 7 levers are. But I'm encouraging you to go buy the book and read the book and get deep with the 7 levers. So here they are. We've got volume, price, cost of goods sold, operating expenses, capital, risk, and strategy. Mm-hmm. That's pretty solid. And you do a great job in the book, really interlacing all of that. So I don't want to dig into that right now because we're going to go down the outline here and we're going to dig into some stuff that I think is going to be very entertaining for everybody. So in practical retail terms, what is cash flow for that independent that's out there that's passionate, the skateboard shop owner, the boutique owner, the candle shop owner, the paper store. Yeah. That's just in there doing what they love and they are just getting blindsided on a regular basis.
Yep. So cash flow is basically how much cash you have left over at the end of the day after everything. After you account for your revenue, your cost, then you have your profit, all the money that's tied up in working capital and money that you invest in equipment, trucks, whatever it is, tenant improvement in your store, whatever it may be, all those capital expenditures. That's really the definition of it. And so free cash flow essentially is what's left over after all that. And it allows you to do 3 things. Number 1, to pay yourself dividends or distributions above and beyond if you pay yourself through your business, through W-2 wages. It allows you to pay down debt. It allows you to reinvest in your business. So that's what cash flow is. Cash flow is not the same thing as what your bank balance is. So don't get that confused. When I talk about cash flow, I'm not saying, okay, to measure that, just open up your Wells Fargo online account and see how much you have in your bank. That's your cash balance. Cash flow is what's the net positive or the net negative at the end of the month. So you started with 10 grand. Are you up by 1,000, 5,000, 10,000? Are you down by 2,000? It's that change in your cash balance month over month.
Perfect. That's exactly what I was going to say. That was a great example that I was going to use. So you want to see that cash expanding, not contracting, and you're going to be able to control that through these 7 levers.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about value. So we understand this concept of expanding cash flow. I've got 10 grand at the beginning of the month. I've run through business all month long. I've done a good job controlling my expenses. I beat last year by 3 or 4%. And now I've got 13 grand going into the next month.
Yeah.
Okay. What creates that value from a cash flow perspective?
Yeah, good question. So value really comes down to, I'm going to just keep it really simple. We're going to ignore time value of money. We're going to ignore opportunity costs and complicated stuff. If you want to dive deep into that, you can always reach out to me and we'll have a nerd out session and we'll get it really deep into finance. But just from a simplistic standpoint, value is generated value, the definition of value, let me just start with this, Jason. It's the sum of all the cash that you're going to collect in your business over its remaining useful life. Okay. So let's say you own a skateboard store, and you get $1,000 in cash after everything. It's really $1,000 that's yours. You can do whatever you want with it. After tax, everything, right? $1,000. You're going to get that for 10 years. And then if you said, well, how valuable is my business? I'm going to get $1,000 a year for 10 years. Let's say $10,000, ignoring the time value of money, right? Ignoring all that. If you said, Steve, how much would you pay for my business if you want to take it over? Well, I'm not going to, like, if I pay you 10,000, I'm going to get 10,000. I'm going to walk away with no profit, like no upside. So I'm going to go to you, Jason, and say, well, I don't know. Like, I know you say $1,000 for the next 10 years, but what if it's 500 one year? Or what if there's a recession? What if I don't know, what if some employees quit or supply chain issues or whatever it may be? So I'll tell you what, I'll pay you $6,000. And then the difference is my upside, right? That's the risk that I'm willing to take. So that's value. And I think a lot of people confuse value, or they confuse the valuation of their business. So they talk about value in just these abstract terms, but just think of it like that. It's all the cash you're going to collect over the remaining life of your business. Okay, let's talk about value as it relates to free cash flow. When it comes to free cash flow, a lot of people will say, I have positive cash flow. I had $10,000 in my bank last year. When I started, now I have $50,000. I have positive cash flow. Okay. But it has to be relative to the investment, the total investment that you have in your business. And when I talk about the total investment, it's all your capital expenditures, all your investments in your equipment, your tenant improvement, your building, everything you need to run the business from an equipment standpoint. And then it's all the money tied up in working capital, inventory, right? Mostly. You take those two things, that's your total investment. Then you compare your free cash flow. So let's say I put $100,000 into my business and I have $1,000 of positive cash flow a year. Well, guess what? It's going to take me 100 years to get my money back. That's not, even though I have positive cash flow, that's a terrible business. That's like a 1% return. Now, that's where you have to look at return on invested capital. And I talk a little bit about this in the book. It's what's your return on your capital? And it really ties closely back to free cash flow. So I won't get too nerdy into return on invested capital, but essentially it's how fast you get your initial investment back. That's really what we're trying to figure out here.
Yeah. In retail terms, we call that gross margin return on investment. So I'm going to put $100,000 out. Is that $100,000 going to get turned into $200,000? Is it going to get turned into $120,000? Is it going to get turned into $130,000? Yeah. And your GMROI rating, your GMROI number, you're generally looking at a number of 1 is you recouping your cost, and anything over 1 is how efficient your inventory is. So 1.2, 1.3. It's a big thing that I don't think a lot of retailers understand, is how much they're putting out versus what they're getting back.
Yeah.
And the impact of that, how much they have sitting there and how fast it needs to move, and the impact of that on their cash flow.
I was talking to a business owner, and they're in food and beverage, a little bit different industry, but similar in a lot of ways. But, so we're talking, and it takes $1 million to open a location for this business owner. And he has 7 locations, and most of the locations, they do okay. They make $100,000 a year. And I was talking to this owner, and I said, look, it's going to take you 7 years to get your money back. 10 years to get your money back. $1 million put into the business, $100,000 a year. It's going to take you 10 years. And he's like, wow. Because before, he would just look at his P&L once again and say, I'm making $100,000 a year. That's great. Right? And I'm making that per store. That's more than I can make if I go get a job out there. So he's like, yeah, I'm doing pretty well. And so when I compared it to what he has put in, and I love how you have that metric too with retailers, you have to compare it to something. And I think that's super critical in business.
More advanced operations are tracking their inventory like that. But I didn't do it. I was guilty of it. When I first started out, I had to learn the lesson real quick. I got slapped in the face real fast. You can't just have everything, when you've got to be strategic about what you're putting on the floor, because it's a race against time and how quickly you're going to convert that into cash to pay the rent and pay all this other stuff with, because that inventory will eat up all of the cash, not part of it, all of it. And it's either that you've got too much of it and you got to pay the vendor because the vendor is going to get paid first, or that time is not on your side and you've got so much that you can't move it fast enough, and then it's trapped.
Yeah.
And then it's trapped with no margin sitting in it. So,
yep, exactly.
Yeah, that was a great point there. All right, let's bump up the volume trap. This is a very slippery slope in retail. And I don't know if you deal with this in some of the other spaces that you deal with, but this concept that I can clip my margin 4 or 5 points to boost up volume. Mm-hmm. And you do a great job in the book of really laying out like how much extra sales it takes to recoup those dollars. So why does that never really work out the way it sounds?
Right. Well, I mean, it's you have a margin, right? So you have your volume, you have your revenue, you have your cost of selling all your goods and services, whatever you're offering. And then you have your margin. So it's revenue minus cost of goods sold equals your margin. And if you just do more volume, but you don't fix your margin, then you just perpetuate the problem, right? You just have more the same problem. You just scale your problems. And volume could be a really good lever, but it's a good lever when you combine it with price. So like to retailers and to business, like all businesses I work with, I always say break revenue down into your unit economics and make sure you understand your unit economics. And unit economics are really price times quantity, right? And quantity is the volume. So if you're a restaurant, it's number of orders times your average order value. If you're a retail shop, it's number of units times the average price. Now, if you sell multiple products, it becomes a little bit more challenging. But you can also take your average transaction value times the number of transactions in your retail store, right? If you sell a blend of products without getting into the weeds of all your whole product mix. But really, when it comes to volume, if you can combine that with pricing is going to be your number one lever. I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but pricing's your number one lever. The problem that retailers have though is that they get price shopped instantly. Back in the day, it was a lot different. Now, somebody's in your store, they pull up the phone, and they look on Amazon. They're like, "Let's go, kids. We'll just order this at home," and they walk out of the shop, right?
Daily,
right? So it's a huge thing. And even if you work on value, and we could talk about perceived value, still you're going to have price sensitive people. That's why you need to have a better strategy. It goes deeper than that. If you can fix your pricing strategy, then you pour gasoline on volume. That's where you're going to see the biggest upside.
Yep. Yeah. Keeping that margin structure intact. That's one thing we talk about a lot on the blog is the structure of your retail price. And I think a lot of people get into this business like we were talking about earlier, passionate about skateboards, you're passionate about candles, you are passionate about women's wear, whatever it is that you're passionate about that you decided to open a retail store, you need to understand the structure of the pricing on your floor and understand that that margin revenue that's sitting out there on the floor is the only part of that pricing structure that's up for grabs. And that's all the retailer. That vendor is going to get paid no matter what. And the only portion of that pricing structure is your margin that is going to be up for grabs if you start gutting your margin to push volume up.
Yeah.
And it's exactly like you said, if you can just target the customer more effectively through average selling price, you can offer a more compelling assortment within that zone, and then your volume will go through the roof. Exactly. Yeah. All right. So let's talk about scaling real quick.
Yep.
So if volume alone is a trap, how do you scale while maintaining or expanding margin?
Yeah. Good question. I think Like scaling comes down to, remember when I was talking about return on invested capital? The biggest question that I get is, should I grow my business or should I fix my business? And the one way that we figure this out is we'll do the calculation, return on invested capital. It's net operating profit after tax. So you just look at how much profit are you making from the operations of your business after tax. So you look at that and divide that by your invested capital, all the money you have caught up in your business. And when you do the math on that, what you'll find is a percentage. And so when I look at return on invested capital, I think of it like this. And don't get like confused by like the acronym ROIC, return on invested capital. It sounds fancier than it is. But if you think about it, it's just how much are you getting as a return on the capital in your business after tax? If you put your money in the stock market and over the last 50 years, let's just say it's like 9 to 10% on average. Let's just take 10%. That should be really your threshold. So if you do the numbers in your business, and you should really run these in your business, and you're earning a 5% return on invested capital, that's terrible, right? It means that you're not turning your inventory fast enough. You're not selling at the right margin. You have too much overhead, whatever it may be. There's a multitude of problems that could exist. But if you have a 5% return on invested capital and you scale, it's terrible because you're going to actually destroy value if you do that. Now, if your return on invested capital is like 20%, 30%, or even higher, that's when you know how to scale. There's also a calculation that you could do called your sustainable growth rate, and it'll tell you how fast you can grow. I won't get into the details of this, but there's an actual mathematical formula that you could do, and you could track this on a regular basis in your business. I do this with all my clients. And if you do the math and your sustainable growth rate is 10%, but you grow at 20%, guess what? You're going to need to put in more capital in your business to make up that difference. Just mathematically speaking, like you'll run out of cash if you grow at 20%, but your sustainable growth rate's only 10%. And so when it comes to scaling, the problem that I see out there is a lot of people that mean well, they're well-intentioned. They talk about scaling and 10xing your business, 10xing your life, whatever it is, right? It's just like grow, 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 grow. And they give you all these tactics to do it. But if you don't know your numbers, you can just grow yourself right into the ground, which is sad because a lot of business owners, they want to grow because they think that's the way out. And sometimes it is. But if you don't know the other numbers behind growth, that's when you can get into serious trouble. And you just exacerbate the problem, if that makes sense, Jason.
Yeah. I mean,
I'm sure you see this all the time.
If you're growing when you're scaling, but not expanding cash at the same rate of growth, it's just going to tap the cash.
Yep.
Yeah. It's like another mouth to feed.
Exactly.
All right. So I slid this one in here with scaling. I don't think it really lines up with scaling, but there was two concepts in the book that really led me reaching out to you guys to have this conversation. The first one is that you talk about cash flow as a flywheel system. Mm-hmm. And that was a big aha moment for me. We'll get into the second one a little later down the line here, because on the blog, we also use the flywheel concept. I just found myself very much aligned as I was reading this book, especially with your flywheel concept. We have a system that we write about called the retail trifecta. And it's basically a disciplined buying system, an amplified marketing system that acts as a bridge between buying and selling, and then the selling exit. At its core, I mean, it's really just a simplified cash flow process. And it works on a flywheel system where all of these gears are moving along each other in a perpetually evolving fashion, building on each other. And I found that very interesting that you use that flywheel concept. And in the book, you touch on buying, marketing, and selling. And I had just never seen anybody put that together like that. And in that context, can you touch on cash flow in that capacity?
Yeah, and it touches on, what you're referring to just a minute ago about scaling as well. Like when I think about a flywheel, I think about like a system, right? And the system really is rooted in strategy, sales and marketing, finance, and then your ability to execute with your team. And so if you think about it, if you were to say, hey, I really have an inventory problem. Okay, That's a finance issue. But then you have to go upstream and you have to ask yourself from a sales and marketing standpoint, how well are you doing? And you're like, I'm just really struggling to like push inventory out of my store, like sell product. Then you have to move upstream to strategy. And you got to say, okay, what's your market focus and position? Who's your ideal customer profile? What sets you apart from other competitors, right? There's a lot of things that go into like strategy. And so like you'll notice here, it creates this like flywheel. And from like a finance perspective, if you're not careful, then you'll be bleeding money at certain parts of the flywheel. So I learned about this, especially like the sales and marketing side when I was CFO. As the CFO of a fintech company, we were spending $1 million a month, million. And when I put the flywheel together that you're referring to in the book, I realized where we were bleeding money. At acquisition, we were good. Like we could bring leads in. Great. We do these demos, but then when it'd come to our conversion, because our offer wasn't really solid and compelling, we lose a lot of people. And then we lose even more at retention because people weren't sticking around. So our churn rate was really high. So if I was under pressure to grow my sales, the natural tendency without a flywheel or understanding of the flywheel is just pour more money in sales marketing. But then you're just bleeding more and more money at different parts of the flywheel. So when I realized that, I was like, oh my gosh, if we can just fix our offer and we can fix our conversion rates. And then if we can retain, instead of having a retention of like 60%, let's just bump that to 80. And if we could do that, then everything without spending another dollar is going to radically transform. So that's like the whole understanding of the flywheel. And I think a lot of people are very visual in business. So when I drew this out for my team on the whiteboard, they're like, yeah. Right. So sometimes it's just little tweaks. You don't have to, burn down your business if your retail shop isn't working well. It's just understanding like what are the numbers and then what's the flywheel, then what's the overall system and how does it all come together?
And how does it flow together? You got to have all those gears moving against each other efficiently to keep things moving along. That was a great example you used in the book. I really enjoyed that. So good work there. All right. So inventory and payables. Mm-hmm. We've talked about excess inventory, but how does that strangle cash flow?
Yeah. So, I mean, think about it. It's like I was working with another retail outfit. They were literally taking money out of their bank account and they were putting it in a box and putting that on a shelf. I mean, literally they weren't, but that's the analogy that I gave to them. Mm-hmm. And I think even in one meeting, I was like, hey, give me a few $100 and let's just put it in a box. Let's tape up the box and put it on the shelf. And they're like, okay, well, when am I going to get my money out of the box? I'm like, I don't know. Maybe a year, 2 years, 5 years. And they're like, well, I'm not okay with that. Right. But like, how often do we do that in business? And so with inventory, I think a lot of people, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners and followers, Jason, they're smart. They're savvy business owners. They're like, yeah, no duh. Don't overbuy inventory. Sounds simple, right? But then it ties back to strategy, right? It ties back to strategy. And sure, you can negotiate better terms with your suppliers, but also if you don't have a solid strategy and you don't understand what you're actually doing in your business, your inventory is going to pile. So let me explain. When I talk about strategy, a lot of people, they use strategy loosely. They think strategy is like vision. It's like a vision statement or a vision day with your team. So a lot of people, they just misunderstand strategy. Strategy is really basic and it ties back to numbers. Let's go back to return on invested capital. If you break down return on invested capital, it has two parts into the formula. Number one is your profit margin. Number two is your invested capital turnover. Those two things combined together equals your return on invested capital. So if I give you those two parts, then I could say, all right, Jason, run the numbers in your business. And if your ROIC is 20%, what's driving that? Is it high profit margins or is it high capital turnover, right? Are you turning your inventory fast or like you're really good at turning inventory, like turn and burn? You bring in boxes in the front door, you sell them in the front door and you're just making a ton of money, right? Because you're turning your inventory fast. Great. That's one way to make money. Or you may say, no, I have really high margins on my product. Okay. Then that means you have high profit margins. Tie that back to strategy. If you have high profit margins, it means you're pursuing a differentiation strategy. If you have high capital turnover, it means you're pursuing a cost leadership strategy. And these are the three generic strategies. There's three generic strategies out there. If you look them up from Michael Porter, he is the grandfather of strategy. He wrote a book called Competitive Strategy back in the day. Harvard professor. Three strategies: differentiation, cost leadership, and focus. Focus is just you're niching down and you sell a certain shoe to suburban moms with this type of, foot problem, whatever. It's very niche product. So when you look at your business and you tie it back to the numbers, you know what strategy you're going after. I was working with a retailer and he was, they brought me in to do strategy and they're like, yeah, our stuff, you're going to love it, Steve. Our product is differentiated. It's all handcrafted, Colorado made, organic materials, blah, blah, blah. I said, great. Let's look at your numbers. Their ROIC, number one, was terrible. Number two, their margins were even worse. And I was like, you don't have a differentiation strategy. You may think you do, but your customers, they don't understand what makes you unique. So I think a lot of retailers, they have these shops, right? They have these products and they think, oh, we're so different. We're so unique, but it doesn't show up in the numbers. I can tell you, Jason, that I have a full set of hair. If you're watching this on video, I can say, yeah, look at all my hair. It's like down to my shoulders. I can say that, but I'm just tricking you. I'm a bald guy, right? It's like, I can say whatever I want. And same thing is true. You can say whatever you want about your strategy, but it doesn't mean that it connects. It doesn't mean that it connects to your numbers and its reality.
Yeah, that's another point of alignment that we have. We talk about that a lot on the blog. You've got to have a tactile game plan to move these goods. And coming back to inventory size, the more controllable the inventory is, the easier it is to execute strategy. The easier to execute the strategy, the easier it is to extract the cash out of the inventory. And that's coming back to our flywheel, the retail trifecta. We started a buying process. And we encourage a downstream vision. You're going to put this money out. You're going to put this $100,000 out on your floor. How have you targeted the customer? What is the compelling strategy around that assortment? And then what is your marketing bridge that supports that assortment to guide the customer through your selling channel? I think that's, it gets lost on a lot of people who are passionate about retail. They think that because they're passionate about the business, they're just going to open up shop and it's going to happen. Like your example, case in point, when it gets real quick, things start moving fast, cash starts burning, and that inventory is still sitting there looking at you. So you've got to get very quick-footed really quickly on how to make some stuff happen. And a lot of people, they find that you can get real creative and you become a problem solver real fast when you get into a situation like that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Speaking from experience. Inventory and payables. All right. So we're back on inventory. We're focused on inventory. And I think that's what a lot of people don't understand is they don't understand the impact of the inventory on their retail business. And retail is a cash flow business and it is a inventory business. And you've got to keep both of them healthy to keep things moving forward. So tell me about a payable strategy. This is a leverage point that I don't think most retailers are using. You used an example earlier of somebody who has net 30 and they're paying them in 5 days. So you want to try and get that as much payment room out there as possible, huh?
Yeah, exactly. And so look, like every listener, you could pull your balance sheet and you could do this calculation. And I'm going to share this with you. So there's a cash conversion cycle, CCC. And to compute that, there's going to be three main parts, especially for retailers. The first one is DSO. That stands for Days Sales Outstanding. To compute that, just go to your balance sheet and look at accounts receivable if you have any. Most people probably won't because they're just point of sale, swipe your credit card. But if you bill people or you give people terms, like 30-day terms, whatever it is, you're going to have accounts receivable. So you take accounts receivable, you divide it by revenue, and then you multiply it by 365 because there's 365 days in a year. And it'll give you a number. That will tell you how many days does it take you on average to collect on your receivables. Okay. The next thing you need to do is inventory. Now there's a little twist here. You're still going to your balance sheet, but you're going to take your inventory and you're going to divide that not by revenue, Okay. You're going to divide that by cost of goods sold because that's the driver, right? It's the cost of your goods. So when you go buy your inventory and then you sell it, it's a cost of goods sold. So that's what you're going to use as the denominator instead of revenue. So you have inventory divided by cost of goods sold times 365. You'll come up with a number that represents how many days does it take to turn your inventory. Then you're going to do the same thing with payables. You're going to do payables divided by cost of goods sold. Don't do revenue times 365. Combine those numbers together. So you take your DSO minus your DIO. DSO plus your DIO minus your DPO. That's your days payable. Do that and they'll tell you how many days does it take you to turn cash in your business. So let's put some numbers to this, Jason. Let's just say you don't have any receivables. So it's 0. The first number is 0. Inventory, let's say, is 60 days. 60. That's the calculation you just did. And let's say you pay your vendors in 5 days or 10 days. Let's say 10. 60 minus 10 is 50. That means it takes you 50 days to get your cash back. 50 days. So then who floats the 50 days? Well, that's where your line of credit or debt comes in. Or if you have money tied up in the business, so maybe you have past earnings in your business, that's what's floating that difference. That's why you could have cash or you could have profit, on the income statement, but not have any cash in your bank. So that's the first thing you need to understand in your business is your cash conversion cycle. And you want to shorten that. So Jason, you go probably way more into detail in your podcast and other episodes in your content about managing inventory, but that's going to be your big part. So if you have 60 days of inventory and you could go to your vendors and say, hey, look, just give me 60 days. I'll pay you. I'm good for it. Then guess what? 60 minus 60 is 0. You're getting your cash instantly. Think about Amazon, right? Amazon, you swipe your credit card or you enter your credit card on the platform and then they ship you it, but they get your money right away. Then they turn around, they pay people on the back end. So they actually have negative working capital. They're actually funding their growth and expansion with billions of dollars of capital from other people. So the same thing is true in your business. And you have to watch that first number, that days inventory outstanding. And you have to manage that closely with your payables, right? Because the faster you pay your vendors, that's fine. Maybe you get favorable terms. Maybe they give you better product. That may be part of your strategy, but just understand there's a financing cost to that built into that strategy and that thinking.
So, that you make a great point there. And I just want to touch on that real quick for some of these folks that'll be listening to this. You have that net 60 terms. That doesn't mean go bananas. Get what you can move in that net 60, move it and do it again.
Yep.
That's the concept of turning. Let the vendor cover the cost. If you can move 40 grand at retail and it's costing you 20, get the 40 grand, flip it, and just keep doing it over and over again. That's what we keep talking about with the turn that a lot of people get lost in. They think that they need all of this size to make it happen, and really making it happen is by turning the inventory over and extracting the maximum amount of cash out of the goods sitting on your floor cleanly.
Yeah.
And I think that's the trap that a lot of passionate people, a lot of newcomers to retail fall into. Even professional, seasoned people. You can probably find retailers all over the place falling into that trap.
Yeah.
Overzealousness, what we think we can do and not the reality of what the data is telling you.
Yeah. And then you bring up a good point, and you mentioned this at the beginning of the podcast, so it's worth re-mentioning. When getting in trouble, like when we were referring to that, think of it like this. Let's say you have negative working capital, which is good, right? Let's say you hold your inventory for 30 days and your vendors give you 45 days to pay them. So it means you have 15 days of somebody else's money. The trap, and you just mentioned this, Jason, so I'm just reiterating this so everybody understands this. The trap is you have money in your bank account. So you're like, you know what? I'm going to do a distribution. I've been busting my butt. I deserve a little bit of money. I haven't been taking any money out of the business. You take that money out of your business or you go spend it on something else. It's not your money. It's your vendor's money. You just have it in your bank and you don't understand the timing of your working capital and you could get yourself in a lot of trouble. That's where the balance sheet comes in. Like the income statement shows you one thing. Income statement's fine, right? To understand, are you making money? Are you pricing your stuff appropriately? It does not tell you how to run a business. Does not tell you how to run a business.
Yep. I got to look at the quote here because I was doing some research. Oh, I actually, I turned the page, but I was doing some research on you earlier yesterday, and I came across an image of you, I think from one of your podcasts where you said, it said your P&L is lying to you. Yeah. And I laughed at that. I thought that was hilarious because it is. And it's exactly what you're talking about. And a lot of people don't understand that. They get their compilation from their accountant every month, and they see that $10,000, $15,000 profit at the end every month, and they think they're killing it. And what they don't realize is that cost of goods sold sitting up there is only reflecting inventory that's been transacted on. And if you've got overzealous levels of inventory sitting out there on your floor, that 15 grand in profit that's sitting there is going straight to covering that inventory. And that's what a lot of people, they don't grasp that concept. Yeah, and exactly. You laid it out pretty good there. I had to learn that lesson really quick. I've got a funny story to tell. You were talking about getting zealous and bringing in too much inventory. When I first opened my store, I had a skateboard and snowboard shop here in Houston, and I went bananas. It was probably my second year. I struggled through the first year. I made it. My second year, I had a pretty solid lift, and I was feeling good. I went out and bought all of this base layer because I thought I was just going to sell all of this base layer to everybody. And that's been 2026? We're probably talking 20 years ago. I still have some of that base layer sitting here in my attic.
Yeah.
That's how long it sticks around, and it's not worth anything. Right. And that's a great example of that new retailer optimism. Mm-hmm. And that's why I really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation with us, because this is going to be good for a lot of people out there. So retail has massive seasonal swings, holiday buying, preseason cash crunches. How do you manage cash through these cycles?
Yeah, and that's where you have to have a forecast. And there's a big difference between a budget and a forecast. Budget carries a negative connotation. So when I work with companies and we need a budget, a budget's like a control mechanism. And the reason why budgets can be good, but it's really behind the scenes is a tool to control behavior. And if you don't believe me, just go to your partner, your whoever, you share a bank account with, and say, hey, I'm going to put you on a budget. And then let me know how they respond. Probably not super well. A forecast is more about looking at trends in your business, seasonality, trailing 12 months, breaking down your unit economics to understand what are my highs and lows. So let's just say we do the same amount we did last year and that we've been doing on the average of the last 3 years. What's my cash position? Okay, great. We're in the green. What if that drops 10%? Oh, wow. That's a pretty big hole. What if it drops 20%? Well, I'm out of business. What if it goes up 50%? Right. And so you have to have a forecast and a tool where you can mess with the numbers and understand in real time what that does. You're busy with retail. Oh, I need to hire somebody else on the floor, right? To help out. I'm slammed. Plug in their salary. Oh, wow. That's really going to hurt us when it comes to the summer, whatever it may be. But you have to understand, okay, if I make this decision, what's the financial impact? That's really what a forecast does.
Yeah. And that comes back to that conversation we were just having. If your vendor's giving you net 60, buy the amount of inventory you can sell in that net 60. Mm-hmm. Don't try and stretch it out to buying 120 days, 180 days of inventory within that net 60 term by using that open to buy forecast. In our line, we call it open to buy. You call it a forecast, and that's the rolling budget that any retailer should be using. But just because those dollars are sitting out there, you're still limited by the resources you have to go after those dollars. And the more close in you can get to managing those dollars into seeing what the landscape's going to look like, the better off you're going to be and staying in within those terms. That's where a lot of people get themselves in trouble. It's they really try to exploit those terms as much as possible, and they wind up with too much inventory, and they just wind up paying the vendor.
Yep, exactly right. Yep.
All right, so this is one I had to go back and add in. I was reading through the book this week, and I just felt we should we've touched on it a little bit by talking about the income report, and I want to get a little deeper into it. But your four levers of profit. Mm-hmm. All right. You talk about the four levers of profit in the book: volume, price, cost of goods sold, and OPEX. Mm-hmm. Okay. Walk me through this framework.
Yeah. So those are the four levers that are going to impact your profitability. So we talked about volume. We talked about pricing, the impact there. And cost of goods sold is really, that's your cost of delivery. So that's the cost of everything that goes into putting something on the shelf, servicing customers, answering questions for customers, customer experience, all that stuff, and then putting it into the hands or the bag of the customer and they walk out the store. So that's your cost of delivery. You can make improvements to your cost of goods sold mostly through your labor. That's going to be where most of your upside is, because you can hold a lot of inventory. We've been talking about that, but for the most part, the majority of companies, they know how to manage their material costs or their product costs or whatever it is. It's mostly in the labor. So it's understanding, how do you manage your labor? How many hours does it take to actually run your store? That's key. And knowing what those numbers are is really critical. It gets very dynamic because you can't just say, hey, it takes about 500 hours to run a location. You can't just do that, because Mondays, I'm sure for most businesses, is a lot different than a Saturday and Sunday, right? You're going to require more hours. So a lot of businesses, they try to simplify. They're like, hey, it's 500 hours divided by 30. Okay, boom, boom. This is how many hours you have a day. And then they tell their manager or whatever, they say, this is the number of hours you have to schedule people with. But it doesn't work that way. It's got to be more dynamic, because some months have 4 weekends, some months have 5 weekends, and you have to make it more dynamic. But managing your labor is super critical. That's cost of goods sold. That's probably your biggest lever there. And then overhead. So overhead, that's everything required to run your location. And I remember when I was younger, I started my first business when I was 16 as a landscape design build company. And I grew it to a few $1,000,000 in revenue, and I had no clue how to read financials. So if you're listening to me and you're like, wow, I don't understand how to read financial statements, like, okay, join the club. The majority of people don't. And when I started out in business, I had no idea what I was doing from a financial perspective. I made so many mistakes. That's why I'm so passionate about this today. But when I was starting out, I was like, I'm going to buy the nice as this, buy the nice as that. And I just like splurge on my overhead. And then looking back, I'm like, that's dumb. Right? I mean, unless you want to just invest all this money in your business and you don't want to take it home for you and your family, right? Or whoever it is on your other side. But that's what I say, is just like, be really intentional with your overhead and make sure that the overhead is contributing to delivering a great product or a great experience to your customers. And I just want to touch on that, Jason. I know you didn't ask me about this, but when it comes to inventory and strategy, going back to that, the biggest frustration that I have, I can tell you this, when I go to a retail shop, is I'll say, okay, I need a new black shirt, right? Wear a black button-up shirt. I wear it every day, pretty much. So I need a new one. I go into a store. I'm like, I just want to pick some up on my way home. And I go into the store, and guess what? They have black shirts, but they have 5 2XLs and they have 6 extra smalls. And that's all they have on the rack. And I'm like, what the heck? So of course I'm just going to go online and buy it online. And I'm like, never go back to that store again. So it's like understanding the customer and getting obsessed with the customer. I've worked with so many businesses that are obsessed with themselves. They sell products that they want to buy or that they think are interesting. Oh, look at this basket. It's so cute. Yeah, no one else cares, right? So like as retailers and as business owners, if you don't want a bunch of inventory piling up, you have to be obsessed with your customers. You have to know what the heck they want. And if you're in an area where everybody's out of shape, and you really know your demographics, yeah, it's going to change the sizes of clothes that you carry. If you're in an area that's, affluent, very athletic, a younger demographic, you're going to have different sizes. But I just think that what crushes retail more than anything, and you know this way better than me, Jason, is that Amazon is so good at knowing me and you. That's why they crush it. And I think a lot of people, they don't spend enough time on that. So their inventory piles, they don't pay attention to their cash flow. They're not pricing appropriately. All these things come back to cash flow. But what I want your listeners to hear is that to fix your business, you don't have to go get an accounting degree. It's not, well, my business isn't doing well because I don't know how to track my numbers. No, your business isn't doing well because the strategy is terrible. Your sales and marketing is terrible. You don't track things. You don't have financial intelligence in your business. So you don't even know what to fix. And then it just all compounds and it all becomes a problem.
Let me get my soapbox out real quick because you unintentionally waded into the anonymous retailer trap. We talk about this at exhaustion on the blog. You have to separate yourself from personal bias if you want to be successful in retail, especially in specialty retail. And if you're going to be competitive out here, you cannot be caught up in your feelings about the products. I've taught hundreds upon hundreds of people how to sell on a retail sales floor. Very first thing that I tell them is to leave your personal biases in the car. You have to be 100% in tune with this sales floor. You have to be 100% in tune with this selling data in a buying position of where the customer wants to do business with you. You've got to be in tune with the customer and not your ideas of where the customer should be or is going to be. That is the number one skill set that I think separates a successful retailer from a non-successful retailer, is their ability to be able to separate themselves. I've worked with some of the best retail salespeople that any of us have probably ever seen. And the number one skill set that they have is being able to walk out on a sales floor, assess the situation, and move the goods that are there with zero bias.
Yeah.
And that lines up with exactly what you're saying perfectly. That was a great point there. Did you have anything else you want to clarify there on that?
No, I think that's good. That's good.
I want to come back to your 4 levers of profit because I've got some things that I want to expand on there. You know, I keep coming back to this compilation that these retailers get from their accountant every month. And it all lines up with what we're talking about with terms and this inventory situation. You know, you get your compilation coming back. You've got your top line sales. You've got your cost of goods line. You've got all your operating expenses and then that profit looking at you down at the bottom, and it looks good every month. And that's great. But that cost of goods line only reflects what was transacted on.
Yeah.
I keep harping on this. I did a really great interview with a gentleman named Matt Powell last week, and we kept harping on it that cost of goods line will get you in trouble because it doesn't reflect the vendor getting paid. It only reflects on what you've transacted on at the cash register. Mm-hmm. And it does not reflect all that excess that's been sitting out there on your floor. And the closer in you can pull those supply lines and keep that cash flow manageable, the better off you're going to be in having a more true picture of what that P&L looks like. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Metrics that matter. I don't think a lot of people understand what working capital is. Can we get a clean layman's breakdown of that?
Yeah, working capital, the most basic definition is it's your current assets, which is on your balance sheet, minus your current liabilities. That'll tell you what your working capital is. I like to take out excess cash. If you're sitting on a ton of cash that's not required to run the business, I extract that. And if you have interest-bearing liabilities in the liabilities, I take that out. So if you're sitting on credit card debt or things that you're using to finance a business, I take that out of liabilities. But it's for most people, current assets minus current liabilities, that's your working capital.
So if I've got $100,000 in inventory and I owe $50,000 on that inventory, I've got $50,000 in working capital.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, that's pretty simple. Okay. You go through EBITDA a lot in the book. When does that matter to retailers?
Yeah, so EBITDA just tells you what did you earn before interest cost, taxes, and depreciation and amortization. So It's really helpful for just comparison. If you're ever going to benchmark yourself against somebody else, it's helpful because maybe one company has a lot of debt and they're paying a lot of interest. By excluding that with EBITDA, you can have more of an apples to apples comparison. Same thing with depreciation amortization. Somebody spends $1 million to open their retail location and they're depreciating those tenant improvements, and somebody else has a different depreciation schedule. You want to exclude that. That's why EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, it's basically here's profit that I can compare to another retailer to understand how am I doing. Some people think EBITDA is cash flow. It can kind of get you there, but not really. There's other things, working capital, for example, that's not an EBITDA. So don't get tricked by thinking EBITDA is the same thing as free cash flow, because it's not.
That lines up more with like a P&L statement.
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then what financial metrics should retailers actually be tracking?
Yeah. I think margin, number one. Well, let's back up. Let's start from the top of the income statement. Unit economics, understand your unit economics. Average value per transaction times number of transactions. That's one, right? Watch how that trends over time. You should also be getting into your P mix, your product mix, to understand, okay, what's my margin on a very detailed level? But just your unit economics, that's the first part. Margin, look at your gross margin, look at your operating margin. That's the income statement. Then on the balance sheet, I would be looking at your current assets minus your current liabilities, so you can understand your liquidity there. And then look at your cash conversion cycle. So what we walked through before, taking your days of sales, days of inventory, days of payable, that'll tell you your cash conversion.
Which is AKA turn, right?
Yep, your turn, yep.
Okay.
And then on the statement of cash flows is monitoring your free cash flow. So those are the main things. And look, when it comes to metrics that matter, it really comes down to this. A metric is just an answer to a question that you have in your business. I think people can use ChatGPT and type in, what are 10 metrics I should measure as a retailer? Okay, I'll spit out a bunch of garbage, right? Some of them are good. Some of them are like, okay, that doesn't really relate to my business. The trap that you can find yourself in, you're measuring stuff that has no impact on your business. It goes back to my example of alling or running. I can measure the temperature of this room and say, yeah, Jason, it's like 72 degrees in here. I can measure how many steps it takes to get to the bathroom. I can measure how many times I swallow in a day. I can do a lot of weird measurements, right? Doesn't change my life. Really, with retailers, you got to say, what are the core metrics in my business that I need to be paying attention to that are helping me to solve the biggest constraint in my business? And then by measuring those, more importantly, you have to know, okay, if this goes up or if this goes down, what are the behaviors I'm going to change in my business to drive it into a more positive direction? You don't want to look at your financials, or you don't want to look at a bunch of graphs and say, oh, that's great. Wow, margin is going up. I have no clue how I got it to go up, but that's great. You need to know with precision, if my days of inventory goes up, these are the 3 things I could do, right? And so that's when metrics really matter.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, understanding how all of that.
Yeah.
All right, so let's. I want to start bringing this home here. So this is the section I've been waiting on right here. This is the second reason why I reached out. Strategy and value creation. All right, this book is laced with a heavy dose of strategy. Mm-hmm. I found myself very much aligned with your take on strategy. If we do a good job here today, let me get some more content under my belt. I'm going to get you back on here and we're going to go through strategy.
Love it.
I'm right there with you. I'm equally passionate about strategy and putting that together. But for me, right here, this was the one-liner of the book. This was the whole book for me. Strategy is not an exercise. It's a set of interrelated decisions about where your company will compete and how it will compete and how it will win. That was solid right there. That's a retail therapy gym right there. That's great. And if people can understand that, like how, and it comes back to that flywheel conversation. All of these decisions that you're making are working together and how are you going to effectively use them to compete and win? I have this inventory size. How am I going to tell this story to amplify the story of this inventory and pass these customers through to the sales floor and execute on the margin?
Mm-hmm.
How does cash flow thinking change strategic decisions?
Mm-hmm.
What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, it's going back to strategy. It's you can have a vision all day long for your business, but really, if you have a strategy, like everybody has a strategy. Every business owner has a strategy. It's just whether your strategy is written and formal, but you're following some type of strategy. Every single day, you open up your shop, you open up your store, you're selling products and services. The key is how do you know if your strategy is working? That goes back to cash flow. Right. And then when you tie in the levers, the levers are going to be based on your strategy. So if you want to sell more volume, that's going to be dependent on your strategy. If you want to sell things at a higher price or carry more high-end goods, that's going to be dependent on your strategy. So they all connect together, right? That's where, I'm a CPA. So I did my time in public accounting, and I think there's a lot of good CPAs out there, but I think CPAs are mostly there to say, this is what you did.
Yeah.
It's like, here, this is what you did. And it's like, okay, great. How do I fix it? It's like, well, I just do your taxes. I just do your financials. But strategy is looking at your numbers and saying, how do I go influence behavior? How do I make these interrelated choices that aren't going to conflict with one another? You can't be a high-end retailer and sell high-end products and your store is terrible, right? I mean, there's discrepancies there. So everything has to tie together. It all has to fit. And you have to know what strategy you're pursuing. It goes back to, are you going after differentiation? Are you going after cost leadership? And do your everyday choices make sense? Right?
Yeah, that's it kind of comes back to what we were talking about earlier when you were talking about know your customer and knowing your average selling price and knowing all these transactional metrics to really scale and light the volume on fire. Your strategy should be understanding your business at a granular level and then being able to repurpose all of that transactional information and point it forward to execute a strategy to extract cash and margin off of your floor from a retailer's point of view. This was another good one. Effort alone does not translate to success. How does this apply to retailers working 70-hour work weeks, but still cash strapped? Now, let me just make a point here real quick. All right. So that line right there jumped off the page to me. There was multiple instances where I found both current versions and past versions of myself in this book. And that book right there was me 10 years ago.
Yeah.
That line right there. Sorry, that line right there was me 10 years ago. And that's exactly what you get caught up in with everything that we are talking about here. The cash gets thin, things starts moving fast, you lose headspace, you're killing yourself, you're working every day, and then you're losing clarity. So what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's confusing effort over results, right?
Yep.
Years ago, I had a president come into my office. He's so frustrated. This is when I was running a $1 billion construction company, and he was so frustrated. He's like, Steve, my wife's mad at me. I'm not home for dinner. My kids don't even know me. I'm not working out. I'm not sleeping. I'm just working so many hours. What do you want from me? And I was like, well, I want your business to not lose $3 million a year. That's what I want. And I'm like, I appreciate your effort. Don't get me wrong. And I don't mean to come across as harsh, but I'm like, you're focused on the wrong activities. There's no reward for working 80 hours a week. And look, I'm preaching the choir. I'm really holding up a mirror, talking to myself because I work a lot of hours. And so I could say the same thing to myself. But my hours that I put in are so much more intentional than they ever were before. Just because as I get older, my family is super important to me. And I'm just like, dang, I see my kids growing up very quickly and I love my wife. And so I want to spend time with my family. So every hour at work better be worth it. I remember watching this podcast and they're talking about, Kobe Bryant, the late Kobe Bryant, great basketball player. And his wife basically said to Kobe, she said, look, I'll take on the role of motherhood. I'll take care of the household, take care of the kids. I'll do that to support you, support my husband. But you better go out there and be the best version of yourself. You better be the best basketball player you possibly can. And so I think it's like when it comes to our effort and results, it goes back to alling. You can subscribe to that magazine, join the skateboard club. You could do all this stuff or just do the right things. Do the things that are super hard that are going to get your ollie up 1, 3, 4, 10 inches. And so like sometimes we just either we don't know or we just default back to the same patterns. But instead it's like, what do I need to focus on to really move the needle? That's what I'm referring to.
Yep. Work smarter, not harder.
Yep, exactly.
Yep. And it all comes back. It ties back to everything we've talked about. Understand your business, understand your data so that you can put out, and I'm not saying work hard, put out less effort to get bigger results.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. Well said.
I think people confuse that as well. Just because you have experience and you understand how to look at the data to make informed decisions, it doesn't mean you have to look like you're working hard. And it doesn't mean it has to kill you. And I think a lot of people misunderstand that. That was a good one. You were talking right to me in that one.
Yeah.
Look at numbers, look at the real problems, execute with focus and discipline. That's money. That's money. That's everything we're talking about today. Look at the numbers, look at the real problems, execute with focus and discipline, and make it happen. That was another killer one. Good job there. And then, so what do you think changes when a retailer shifts from activity to disciplined execution?
Yeah, I think that's when their business starts to change because they're focusing on the right things, the right drivers, and that drives more cash flow and it drives everything that we've been talking about.
Yep. Yeah, it comes back to that personal bias aspect of it. This is a disciplined business. You can't just go out and get everything, and you've got to have a narrow vision of what you're going to do and how you're going to get it, and that just ties back to all this strategy stuff here. Yeah. All right. So last one here before we move into our 5 points. What's the difference between building a business and building an asset?
Yeah. Building a business is, a lot of people could build a business. Building an asset is a cash flow machine, building a machine that actually is returning cash. I think that's the difference. Otherwise, you're just building a liability. You have a business that you go to, you become the slave to it, or your balance sheet just like traps you with so much debt or liability. It could really set you back in life. So building an asset is really the way that I like to go because then it'll pay you dividends, year after year if you could get it right.
Great take on that. All right. So I like to close out with 5 points. So we've got most retailers listening are already running their business. They can't start from scratch. What are the 5 points they can make right now to shift from cash flow fog to clarity?
Yeah, I think like number one is you have to have financial intelligence in your business. So you have to know your numbers. That's like if we're working with a business, we can't work with you if you don't know your numbers. So you have to have the financial intelligence system. Clean financials, forecasts, KPIs, everything right at your fingertips. So you know your numbers, you can speak your numbers. That's really important, which leads into number 2. You have to know your numbers and you have to be able to speak them. Like if I came into your business and said, what's your average transaction value? You can't guess and say, I think it's like $50, 50, maybe 60. You need to know it's $55.85. And that's up by 12% from last quarter because we did these 3 things. Like being able to speak with that precision, you don't have to be a nerd, but you have to know your numbers, right? That's the key. You should know your margin. Hey, here's our margin. I think that's super important, and it's the responsibility of a business leader. I think number 3 is pricing strategy. You have to have a pricing strategy that connects back to your strategy, that connects to your customers, connects to your value prop, because pricing is going to be your number one lever. It's going to be your number one lever with cash flow. The next thing, number 4, is strategy. And I'm not going in any particular order, but strategy is really critical because it's all the interrelated choices that we talked about. So you definitely have to have that. And then I'd say just like the last piece that you could do like right now today is you could build out different models in your business and really understand what levers to pull. So it kind of goes back to the financial intelligence system, but you can model out your business and say, okay, if I improve this, what's the upside? If I do this, what's the upside? And then you'll know exactly where to focus in your company. Right. And I'll talk a little bit about how you could do that. And as we wrap up here.
So the book is Cash Flow: How to Build a Great Company That Endures in Tough Economies and Thrives in Booming Ones. I found this book to be fantastic. You did a great job on it.
Thanks, Jason.
And I just stumbled upon it. I mean, it was like buying a tape back at the record store when I was a kid. I think you did a good job bringing it down to a level for somebody who is not a financial person. I'm a retailer. Now I have a little bit different experience in retail than most, but I found the book to be very informative and useful. So who'd you write this book for?
Yeah, I wrote it for the small to mid-sized business owner. I mean, the masses and across the US and across the world. So I've had people internationally reach out about it. And the whole goal is just, how do I bless the lives of more people by teaching them some basics about numbers?
And I know you want to sell a book. Look, this book's $10. This is not an expensive book. This was top 3 book that I read in 2025. I was blown away. There's also an audiobook version. And if you're a Kindle member, you can read it for free. So there's multiple channels that you can find this book in. Frameworks and tools are in the book that we didn't cover today.
Yeah, so I would say too, to add on to that, I have a podcast called Strategy Meets Finance. And the book, I broke the book down. And so it's on the podcast for free. So if you want to listen to it, it's broken down into different chapters. So yeah, if you can't afford the book, or if you want a free version, like, go there. To me, it's like the book, sure, it's great to sell a book, but that's not really how I change lives. And that doesn't really drive my purpose. You know, the big tool that I was mentioning earlier that we offer to people is we do a free financial health check every month for a few companies. We have a certain limited number of spots we open every month. You have to qualify. So you have to qualify and you have to meet certain standards. But if you do, we look at your financials, we run it through our tools, and we tell you exactly in your business, this is what you can improve. This is the upside if you do it. And like I said, it's free. You can find that out on our website. And that's probably the greatest gift that I could give to people. And I've seen a lot of lives change because of it. That's what really drives me. I think it's like business is one of the best vehicles to bless the lives of people. That's what I'm all about.
That's a pretty awesome resource. And I want to touch back to your podcast as well, because that thing's a wealth of knowledge too. You got a lot of content on there. It was like the first 4 or 5 episodes are all strategy. And that's how I found you. Like,
Nice.
so, where can people find the book and learn more about you?
Yeah. So my website, cultivar.com, COLTIVAR, Cultivar. That's my website. That's where you could get the free financial health check. That's where you could get other resources. Be sure to check that out. You could also connect with me on LinkedIn, pretty active on LinkedIn. But yeah, I mean, I came onto this podcast because I appreciate what you're doing, Jason. Don't have anything to sell to anybody, but if we could ever be of use for your business, yeah, reach out and we can see what that may look like.
All right. So one last question before I let you go. If retailers can take one mindset shift from this conversation, what should it be?
Yeah, the mindset shift is the mindset shift. which sounds kind of funny. I mean, I just think that so many people are like, numbers aren't my thing. I'm not a numbers person, never been really into math. It's like, you can't say that. You have a fiduciary responsibility in your business to protect the assets of your business. You have a responsibility in your business to generate returns. Why? Because you've been entrusted with money. Money's a privilege. There's so many people across the world that don't have access to it. So to just, throw your arms up and say, yeah, I'm not a numbers person. That's why I don't make money in my business. I'm just doing it because of my passion. Those are all lame excuses. And you can't live your life like that. Too many people depend on you. There's so many lives that you can impact. So I just say you have to change your mindset if that's anything that you think. Or if you're like, it's too complicated, there's no way to do it. I mean, there's so many resources. So I would just say change your mindset when it comes to numbers. Doesn't have to be that complicated. And you can find a lot of success in business.
The mindset is the mindset. That's another one. That could be a book title right there.
Yeah.
Well, Steve, I really appreciate your time today, bud. Thank you very much. I wish you the best with your books and your podcast and everything you're doing. This was a great conversation, and I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down and talk with me.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me, Jason. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. We'll be in touch.
Cheers.
Cheers.